welcome to this knowledge session of Blue Dolphin. The theme is what to look for in the successor of critical chain project management. I'd like to introduce Wolfram Müller. Wolfram is the founder of the Blue Dolphin community with over 100 people connected to it. He has 20 plus years experience in project, 30 years in project, 20 in Agile. He is working for 20 years, something like that, in critical chain project management, theory of constraints. He's published several books. He's author of several books, co-author of several books, speaker in the TOC ICO conference on the topic of agile hyper productivity. And well, I'm actually, we met each other for, I think, 8 years. I look at you from something like that in Utrecht. And since we are connected, I joined the community almost a year ago. It was on my wish list, but I only joined roughly a year ago, and I like it very much. And I'd like to give the opportunity, Wolfram, to say a word from your side, and then we kick off. Wolfram.
Thank you, Jan, for the introduction. I'm always a little blushing if someone tells what I've done in the last years, and then you can realize I'm a little older. Huh? So that's quite some time I had to work right now. And that's also part of the introduction. What I learned in the last years is, of course, a lot about methodology stuff, huh? And critical chain was one of the things what really helped in one-on-one, and then I also started consulting. But the interesting part is, as always, I learned that consulting is not so cool. Huh? So we learn the less we are working with the companies, the better it works. And that was an important insight years ago. That shows already a little of the DNA of Blue Dolphin. So the Blue Dolphin community is all about bringing this knowledge, how change can be made easy, how methods can be made easy so they can be applied all over the world with a little effort. So that's a basic idea of Blue Dolphin: spreading the knowledge, spreading the word, and supporting people like Hans-Peter, Thomas, Boris, Michael, and you, Mila, of course, to do it more or less on their own, and the Blue Dolphins will support. And that's the main idea. So, and that's already the basic, because if you are thinking like this, then it's mandatory to challenge yourself all the time. What was good in the past years, fine, you have to improve it. And that was a reason why I really finally connected Jan, because he did posts, oh, this CCPM stuff, this is bad stuff, and it has to be removed and throw it away, it's and stuff like this. And I thought, what is this guy doing? Posting about the most precious things I learned of critical chain, and it's so valuable. And that's the moment when it kicks in for me, and I say, okay, then I have to talk with this guy, because maybe he has found something that I overlooked. And even if it's not easy to go out of your comfort zone, it helps to see new stuff. And then Jan explained me more about this Empower Your project. And I had to admit, we had similar ideas in the years before, but he was the one who compiled everything, put it into a project, and made it in a way marketable. So, and that was a cool thing, and that was the start of the working together. So, and this session today is exactly in this tension field. So we have this critical chain, we have Empower Your project, we have new ideas, and I really like such sessions because we can learn again. So, and in the end, it's a question about what is really the core Huh? What is the mandatory stuff, the crucial stuff? And what I learned in the last discussions of the last weeks, Jan always said, "Oh, the CCPM stuff," and I said, "No, no, no, no." And it's wonderful, the CCPM stuff. And then we found out that we never had a clear idea what the CCPM stuff is. So Jan had a different view on CCPM than me. So finding out the core is one. Finding out what is this CCPM stuff anyhow. And what I really like in this discussion, and maybe this is the end or the final questions at the end, Jan, is, okay, your input, what is still needed to make Empower Your Project and Critical Chain, or a mix, or whatever, so perfect that it's easy for you to tell it to your boss, to sell it to your colleagues, to sell it to your boss, to sell it to the outside world, and to implement it. And that would be the interesting part for today. So I really like a challenging discussion, and Jan can be challenged very well. He's very clear about his ideas, but sometimes he needs some arguments. So really challenging, and then thinking about what is still missing to make it a wonderful product for you. So that was a long story from Blue Dolphin to Empower Your Projects to challenging Critical Chain.
Thank you.
Have fun.
What to look for the successor of Critical Chain. I'd like to start with a quote of Russell Eckhoff. And one of his quotes is, "Successful problem solving requires finding the right solution for the right problem. But we fail more often because we solve the wrong problem than because we get the wrong solution for the right problem." And this is a kind of a thought experiment. I use this quote as a thought experiment when I get stuck, or when there is problems or anything else. Then I use that quote to take a different perspective, to look at it from a different angle. What to look for in the successor of Critical Chain. And this is roughly the agenda. I start with a short review of what is Critical Chain, a little bit of background, so we know what I was talking about, what to look for in the successor. Maybe we have already an idea. And then I will start with the current reality. What is actually the situation of today, where we try to find solutions for, and we dive into the composition and the working of project organizations. Next is to decode efficiency. How does that work? Efficiency in project organization. We start talking about flow, and we come back to the question what to look for in the successor of Critical Chain. I start with a review of Critical Chain. Critical Chain project management. And there is a big promise of Critical Chain, and the Critical Chain promise is just like theory of constraints, and theory of constraints has a promise to provide a specific strategy and tactics to achieve a net profit in 4 years that is equal to the current sales. And it provides the strategy and the tactics and how to do that. And the second promise that comes with theory of constraints is that it is exceedingly simple. And no matter how complex it initially looks, every situation is exceedingly simple. There are hundreds of cases, maybe thousands of cases, where the productivity or the throughput improved a lot. Shorter throughput time, shorter lead time, increased reliability, increased productivity, and these are not high runners. Well, the core idea of Critical Chain project management is that the problems come from bad multitasking. If you just reduce bad multitasking, then you get those amazing results. And if you fix that, if you eliminate that bad multitasking, if you spread the work more evenly across the organization, then it is almost unavoidable that the throughput increases, that you get more output, that the quality increases, that the lead times will reduce. You get everything, all those improvements, you get it by just this single measure or this single focus, reduce the multitasking. There are a couple of tools or methods or methodologies that are part of critical chain project management. So I do a very short introduction of it. In the old, and the critical path. The critical path is path that defines the project duration. If there is a delay on one of those tasks, then the project will start to delay anyway. So this is very tight and there is no delay possible. Well, I learned at university that the critical path doesn't take into account resources. So if there is a resource that has to do two tasks or at the same moment, like this, then yeah, it doesn't work anymore. Well, the critical chain takes care of that double tasks, that you have more tasks at the same moment. It stretches the project duration a little bit, but it avoids that you have multiple tasks. So it avoids that you plan for overloading your organization just because the way you organize your schedule. And just by changing that, you reduce multitasking already a little bit. So that is a great. So this is the name giver of this critical chain project management, but there is more. The other very important tool of critical chain project management is buffer management. And the idea is that in every task there is so much reserve. When I had to provide an estimate, I always made some reserve. So I thought maybe it takes me a week, but my answer, I say it will probably take 2 weeks. Then you're pretty sure that the work will be completed in those 2 weeks. Well, as a project manager, I added another week to that. So a task of 1 week might end up for 3 weeks in the project schedule. And the way critical chain is dealing with it, that it takes all those reserves and put them at the end of the project. So it pulls them out of the schedule, out of the task, and put them to the end of the project. By just doing this buffer management stuff, you can do amazing task time reduction. You get a shorter project duration, 25% or something reduction for free. Another tool very famous for within critical chain and theory of constraints, I heard it already, is the fever chart. Looks like this, and there buffer management is used to measure the reliability of your project schedule. So if that buffer is consumed very quickly, if people need a lot of buffer relative to their progress, then the chances that the project will delay increase. Project follows a trajectory from left to right across the board, and when it stays in the green, your project will be on schedule, and when it turns red, then your project is at risk. It can't be delivered anymore, at least without measures. Very powerful. And what especially is so powerful about this is that this is an objective measure. You can measure it. It's not dependent from a judgment of project manager who is going to tell at the very last moment that the project is going to be delayed, and then you cannot do anything about it. Here we talk about single project. So this is what you do within one project, but that is not all. Most projects are executed in an environment with many other projects, dozens, hundreds, and in order to prevent that all those projects happen at the same moment, there is that concept of staggering. Well, the concept of staggering I need to mention. There is a bottleneck in the organization. That's the resource with the highest workload, or a stage of the project, a phase of the project that gives most of the delays. And that stage or resource can be used to sequence the projects and to align it. And it works like this. You have multiple projects at the moment, and you can line them up a little bit, taking that specific resource, and the terminology that we use for that is the drum, that you take the drum into account, that you use that to sequence based on the drum. And the advantage of this is that if you do this, you don't need to bother anymore about the resource management for all the other resources. Well, this is nice, all those tools. This is the toolbox of critical chain project management, but we have also, of course, how to implement it. Then you need to have also the schedule, how to install it. And that is basically the system and tactics tree for critical chain project management. That is the guideline, that is the stepping stones that you have to go through in order to implement it. So, now, very quickly, the part that I talk mainly about is this part. I lined up the measures. In total, there are 45 measures to take, and this is just 15. These are the very first measures, and this is the minimal sustainable solution. If you do less, then critical chain will not sustain. Okay. Now, what I very much like about the system and tactics tree is the part with the small text. And that is all the assumptions that are there documented. And that helps not only to understand what you have to do, but also why you have to do it and why that has to be done in this particular way, according to the developers of critical chain, to the authors of this system and tactics tree. This is the system and tactics tree that is on the TOC-ICO, the TOC Theory of Constraints International Certification Organization. So this is what I believe is the official theory of constraints, critical chain scope of work. And this is at least what I refer to. And if we talk about what to look in the successor of critical chain, it is the successor of this. Well, there is a paradox with critical chain. There is something that should not happen, despite the unbeatable success and the massive proof. There is no doubt that this works. The organizations that are really using critical chain, that are implementing critical chain, that are starting implementing critical chain, are, well, actually exceptionally rare. And that is strange. That is really strange. If it is so successful and there is so much proof, then why is nobody doing it? Critical chain has enablers to create this massive success, unbeatable success, massive proof. So there is so much in favor for critical chain. There are disablers that makes it impossible. I mentioned that I implemented critical chain. I tried implementing critical chain and it failed. And for me, I found it too difficult. I found it difficult to explain. People found it too difficult to learn. I had to explain it every time over and over again. There were so many people involved. It just failed. And also many other consultants think it fails often, also easily falls back again, so that people fall back in the old problems. And these are real severe disablers. If this happens a lot, then those success stories, they are not easy to reproduce. So this is enablers on one side. Disablers put more weight in the balance. I've done a lot of research, analyzed hundreds of problems for this, draw some conclusions from this research, telling something about the current situation. And the first thing is, well, first of all projects run into problems. That is happening all the time. Budget overruns, delays, conflicts. But this is what we're talking about. But also, it seems there's nothing to work. Also, if that would exist, then, well, those problems would have gone over. There are many problems that are not really necessary. And for some reason, we don't manage as a community, as a whole, as the project management community, to change those success rates of projects. Over the past 20, 30 years, it really didn't change. When I look at projects, well, it's the same problems as 30 years ago. So why didn't we change that? Well, for my research, I analyzed hundreds of problems. I collected the problems from my own experience, from what I heard colleagues talking about, and from a little bit from literature. And in this way, I had 50, 60 problems. And the idea with this is that every problem creates new problems, and every problem has a cause. And the idea is, if you have so many problems, then you can just pick randomly one of those problems and see what are the problems that are caused by this problem and what problem is actually causing this problem. And this creates a network of problems throughout the place. So going from one problem that creates the next one and the next one, and it creates chains of problems and visual circles of problems that somehow create themselves. But they also seem to come back or seem to origin somewhere. And it appears that I could trace back 94% of all those problems. I could trace that back to someone who didn't have enough time. Too many things to do. And that was a big eye-opener. I'm not saying that this is the only root cause, but I've analyzed dozens of project organizations. This problem happens everywhere. Every organization has people who have too many things to do, who are overloaded. Even in organizations that just are in the middle of a crisis, where they lost a lot of the business because of it. We just have experienced it with the beginning of the corona pandemic. Then lots of projects were cancelled, but even then there are people in those organizations that are actually still have too many things to do. That was 10 years ago during the financial crisis. That was also this time the case. And if there are people who have too many things to do, well, you can expect any problem at all. But the thing I realized, having been in so many organizations, this is not on the agenda. Nobody is paying attention to this. So that is my mission. So get this problem on the agenda of organizations. The challenge with this project organization is not a racing car where you can just look at the design drawings and the engineering criteria, the specifications, and put it on a table or in a lab and take it apart and look at all the components. It doesn't exist. It is not something tangible. And that makes it really hard to study. So I created a model of the composition of project organizations. And it's not so difficult, it is super simple, but it gives already a lot. Well, one of the things that organizations do, and project organizations in particular, is there is a lot of work that need to be done. We have the people, the individual contributors, we have the teams, we have the project, and they all are about getting the work done. But the bottom line is projects, teams, people are just for one purpose in the organization: get the work done. Clients come to us for a project for a single reason: get the work done. And I've never come across a project organization that is actually not capable of doing that. Always somehow they manage to get out some projects. So they have the tool and all the enablers to get that work done. However, organizations, their purpose of organizations in general is efficiency. Else you have to hire people all the time. Every time you have a new task, you have to hire someone new. And when the task is completed, you let them go. Well, it's stupid, of course, but that is what it is. If you start a project, you have first to recruit everybody and rent all the equipment and build whatever, have a building to sit in. And when the project is, if you have built it for one project, then there are always people who have nothing to do. They are not needed at that moment. And well, they could also do something else. And in an organization, you can organize that, and that can be spread more easily, gives a more constant work. Well, the constraint in project organizations, what is limiting an organization to fulfill its purpose? That is not that people cannot do their work. Get the work done, that is not the real constraint. The real constraint in project organization is we cannot do it efficient. Well, the principle of the theory of constraints is that you only have to focus on the constraint. If you only remove that constraint, then you can forget about everything else. If we can forget about all that complexity that is coming from people and how they align and how the workload is distributed and all those tasks and dependencies, we can forget about that. That must be exceedingly simple. If you do portfolio management, it is all those projects and all those dependencies and all those relations, how they depend on each other, and the shared resources. That makes it so immense complex. And when something changes, you can start all over again. Okay, now we move into the direction now of efficiency. So we're going to decode what is that efficiency? How does that work in project organizations? Efficiency decoded. Well, actually, project organizations are really complex. I see those projects moving around and there are clouds of things that we cannot see. Everybody has their own blind spot, and that makes it really complicated to communicate with each other. But this is a bit sometimes how it feels. It's very difficult to maintain overview or to create overview, let alone that it is very difficult to stay in control, or when you lost control, to get in control again. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. We're just looking at the workflows at the moment. And this is a present visualization of how that works. So we have people in organizations, and those lines are the flow, how the tasks in a project flow. They go from person to person to person. Finally, to it where is finally on the right is where the project gets completed. They start on the left, move to the right. So in every organization, the workload is not distributed evenly. So there are people with high workload, the people are with a low workload, many things to do, few things to do, and there is always one person who has the highest workload. This person is Marianne. And Marianne, we know that is a good specialist and everybody wants to have her in the project, and she has a lot of work and she's always overloaded. There's too much work. And basically she is squeezing as a bottleneck, she's squeezing the output. It is like she's in a pipeline, and the pipeline is the narrowest at her place. She has to process most of the work, and only she has just level this amount of capacity. And when there is more work to come in, then she cannot complete it. But if that work comes in, it gives additional pressure, and that might even result that she's completing less. And the more work gets in, the work gets stuck. Do multitasking, very, very bad. Then actually productivity loses. So this is Marianne. Let's focus on it. Also for bottlenecks, for this type of constraint, it applies that if you want to do something about it, only focus on this resource. That's what we're going to do. So forget about everything else. We just see the project and we only focus on this bottleneck. We're going to line up the work for Marianne. She cannot do everything all at once, but we nicely line up the work for Marianne so that she doesn't have to do everything all at once. There should be a continuous uninterrupted flow. So when the moment that she has capacity available, the moment that she has time available, we must make sure that there is another task waiting for her, another project waiting for her. This is this single sequential flow, but still some projects left is what we see. And we can repeat this mechanism. So we look again, where is the resource with the highest workload, and we're also going to line up. The bottom line is there can be multiple workflows in all project organizations. They can pass through different bottlenecks, and we just have to line it up. And if we can do that, create a continuous uninterrupted flow so that they continue to work and never run out of work, but also not so much that they get overloaded. We create the maximum throughput, the maximum flow, the maximum output, and the most value stream. Now we know that everybody else will have a lower work level, so they will have some time left. But for the maximum throughput is when these two resources in this organization have their 100% workload. But there is a problem with it. I call it the project in the color of the bottleneck. So we have the red project for Marianne, we have the green project for Tiziana. They still move around through the entire organization, and there are still resources that are in both projects. And that is difficult. We have to take care that the resources will be available all the time when they are needed. And this is complicated. We can separate the workflows in different lines and we can line them up. But then the question is what to do with all those other resources that are occupied and have to work in two projects. And I go back now to critical chain. Take a closer look at critical chain. If we have a continuous uninterrupted flow through the bottleneck, we also eliminate the multitasking that critical chain is about. We reduce the workload in the organization, less multitasking will be in the organization, and then throughput will increase. And now we have to look at what is critical chain actually doing. So how does it work? And we had that paradox in the beginning, where we have that massive success and that massive proof, the immense success of critical chain on one side, but the disablers of the difficulties and the failing projects on the other side. So can we still match that? And we just looked at what is the current situation in project organization, and now we can have a look at critical chain back again. Maybe we can understand something better. Well, the constraint in organizations, I just recall, is the ability of organizations to execute project efficiency. They still are able to complete project successful, so they have those enablers for completing projects successfully, but they don't have the enablers for completing projects efficiently. That is, they cannot do that. That is the problem that we discuss. Well, when I go through the implementation scheme, and I'm just going to look at all the things that are happening, then actually the things for that flow, managing that flow, is in the green dots. That is the staggering we discussed. That is releasing new projects. So that is also part of when do we start a project. And that is the virtual drum adjustment that has to do with synchronizing the staggering, synchronizing the flow through the organization. These are the enablers for critical chain. If you do that, you will remove multitasking and reduce the workload. But all the other parts actually don't. So all the things for a single project we could ignore, focus on the project organization, but not on the project. So everything related to single projects we can ignore, but also on the multi-project, the freeze is the abrupt reduction of the workload. I call it a disabler, although it reduces multitasking, because it is a temporary measure. And you do something, but you have to redo it later on with a final solution with staggering. If you have to do things twice, it will increase the burden for your organization of the implementation. But we can see two things. We found the source, this is the source why critical chain is successful. If we line up the project, if we can control the workload in project organizations carefully, then that will eliminate multitasking. It is perfectly in line with the strategy of critical chain and what it tries to accomplish. So that is sufficient for achieving those amazing success stories. But all the other things are not spot on this removing this particular constraint. And if it is not spot on, we have to forget about it. But in this critical chain of activities, we still have to do it, and it creates that additional burden, not fixing the constraint. And that is then a risk. That is a risk that might disable success. Take a closer look at the sequential and parallel flow. So we have one flow that is through one bottleneck, but we have also the two flows or multiple flows. They are all sharing resources. So we have to find a solution for that. So we need two systems for that. Actually, on the level of project organization, there are two systems too. We can pull them apart. Pipelines for the sequential flow, and the organization, something must happen over there to keep those flows aligned when the resources are shared. We are now in the stage that we are going to look for enabler for creating that flow. That is the goal for now. That must be part of that successor. Well, let us first master the sequential flow. In order to master the sequential flow, we must have a strategy of a methodology that can replenish a pipeline just in time. So that it starts a project, gets in time with the bottleneck, and when the bottleneck needs another task, the bottleneck has completed the task, then there must be just arriving a new task. That is replenishing just in time. Well, this is not easy. If you want to do this, you still need to analyze all those projects and all those tasks and what's happening, and still those project schedules. But this is the new insight, or what we need to have, is that for managing a sequential flow, we only need 4 parameters for a project. And that is the lead time, that is the drum effort, that is the planned duration, and the lag time. So it goes a little bit too far to explain how that works, but we only need to reduce a project schedule to 4 parameters. It doesn't need to be very accurate, just ballpark figures, but just with 4, we can do it. And that makes it super simple. We can forget about all the tasks. We don't even need to know who is involved. We don't need to know the dependencies. Still, we can manage that sequential flow. We need a tool for that helps us to do that. And in this case, it is about replenishing just in time. So we want to be able to watch at our mobile and see, oh, the project Aspen is ready to start. And that is just in time. That is actually what we need. The new insight that we work with Blue Dolphin is that you can do that based on 4 parameters per project. Now the parallel flow. So if I have several flows, then how are we going to do that? Let's do parallel flows. So we have then 3 apps and three flows and 3 whatever, and we just do it for every thing again. And the new insight to do this is the following, is that a pipeline can be characterized by 2 parameters. And the first parameter is the slope. And the slope of the pipeline is related to the productivity. So if the productivity increases, the slope becomes steeper. If the productivity decreases, the slope gets flatter. Then the second parameter is the width of the pipeline. So when the level of uncertainty increases, the width increases also. If we want to control a pipeline, we only need to know what is the slope, what is the width. And we can measure that based on how projects move across the plan board. Based on how projects move through the project pipeline, and this is a plan board that shows where projects are in the pipeline, and based on how they move, how fast they move, it is possible to measure both the slope of the roadmap as well as the width of the roadmap. And we only need to know that. In that slope and in the width of the roadmap is all the information about dependencies and shared resources hidden. When there are several pipelines, we don't need to know how those pipelines are related to each other. And this is because of a concept from the theory of constraints. And that concept is that you only need to know your constraint and can forget about the rest. So you need to know how to remove that constraint. So we need to know how to optimize the flow through the bottleneck. And that's the only thing we need to know. So we can forget about adjacent pipelines that are next to the pipeline. We can just forget about it, even if those resources are shared. Strategy for parallel workflows is very much based on the sequential workflow. So it starts with identifying the sequential flows. We have a method for that, and then manage these sequential flows as usual. The way how a sequential flow should be managed. Because of changes in the market, because of changes in the staffing profile or in the people that you hire, the way how projects flow through the organization might change. Or when new technologies get introduced, the way how projects, that might impact the nature of the project or the type of project that you do, and that might result that some projects dry up, clients and the market don't want to have them anymore, and new projects new pipelines start to emerge because of new works, new possibilities created by an R&D department, and then after a while the operational project also change. Well, we need to identify the flows and then manage the flow, and then identify where are the vanishing flows and the new emerging flows, and remove and establish the pipelines. Remove the ones that are not used anymore and establish new pipelines for new projects for the future. So this is a second strategy. So what we actually, the successor of critical chain must have two enablers, two critical enablers. So we put it in our shopping cart, and the first enabler is master sequential flows. The second enabler is the master of the parallel flows. If we have those, then we can control the flow, keep the workload low. That is the important thing. That keeps the multitasking away. It allows good multitasking. So when resources are shared between projects or pipelines, it is good that they can multitask, switch from one project to another, depending on what is happening at the moment. But with those two new enablers, that is what a successor of critical chain should have. If it is up to us what should be in there, then this is the thing. Then the second thing, we must remove the disablers for the success, because it makes it difficult, or it might fail later on, or people fall back or whatever. And the disablers for critical chain is the first, on one side, the enablers, that's about the flow, but on the right side, a disabler is if we have to change the habits of everybody, how they do their work. Because if they don't want, if we depend on that, well, that could block your strategy. That could be a showstopper. Or when we have to introduce new techniques and it's difficult to learn, or to install the new planning software, that could be a disabler for a strategy. It could be a showstopper. Or when we have first to introduce techniques like resource management, it can take a long time to get it up and running. That makes it difficult. And the more people have to change, the more they can fall back from. So if they don't have to change anything, then we remove a lot of the disablers, then remove important disablers from critical chain or from a strategy on this. So we have this picture from in the beginning. We have that the enablers on the left side that makes critical chain so successful. It's an unbeatable success and a massive proof. But the disablers on the right side that put more weight in the scale. And we have to remove that. There we go. And then the successor of critical chain has better chances for organizations to use, and as a methodology as such as well. Okay, this is a whole story. There's a lot of information, and we are reaching the end of the presentation. The reason how I came to this is, what is the one and only problem I have to fix? It's just also a thought experiment for the successor of critical chain.